Before we begin, I need to ask you something. Stories like this are not easy to tell, and they are even harder to hear. If you feel the weight of these forgotten voices, if you believe these hidden histories deserve to be uncovered, then subscribe to this channel. It costs nothing, but it keeps these buried truths from fading back into silence. The air was heavy that night, thick with a silence so complete it felt like it had weight. In the remote hollows of Appalachia, there existed families that the world had forgotten, lines of people living almost entirely apart from the eyes of society, their secrets buried in dust and shadow. It was here, in a house that had seen more generations than any living memory could hold, that a girl was born. But she was no ordinary child. From the moment she took her first breath, the echoes of forbidden acts whispered through the walls, carried by the very blood that coursed through her fragile body. She was the living consequence of a union most would call unthinkable, a brother and sister whose love had crossed a line society had long deemed sacred. Her existence was not celebrated. It was hidden, contained, treated as a shameful anomaly. Yet even in her infancy, there were signs, small, subtle, horrifying to anyone who knew what to look for. Her features were unlike any other child in the valley, asymmetrical, skewed, almost as if nature herself recoiled from the act that had produced her. The eyes, wide and oddly positioned, seemed to carry a knowledge that no child should possess. Those who glimpsed her fleetingly would shiver, though they could not explain why. It was as if her presence alone carried the weight of generations of forbidden choices, an invisible lineage of secret sins encoded into her very DNA. Her family spoke in hushed tones, their words thick with fear and shame. They treated her like a fragile artifact, not a person, fearing the consequences of what she represented. Outside the hollow, the world moved on, blind to the horrors that thrived in isolation. Inside, life was governed by unspoken rules, each one designed to protect a secret too dangerous for daylight. The girl was both the result and the prison of her lineage, trapped in a body that told the story her parents could never speak aloud. And in the stillness of that valley night, the wind through the trees carried with it a sense of inevitability, a quiet warning that some truths, no matter how deeply buried, always have a way of surfacing. Even today, decades later, the tale of her birth persists, not in textbooks, not in public records, but in whispers, fragments of memory passed down from those who dared to glimpse the darkness. It is a story that unsettles because it reminds us of the fragile veneer of civilization, of the dangers that lurk when humanity's most basic taboos are broken, and of the inescapable consequences that sometimes manifest in the form of a single, extraordinary child. She is the result of desire, secrecy, and neglect, an inescapable reminder that the past is never truly gone. The valley where she grew was a place untouched by time, where the mountains rose like silent sentinels and the forests swallowed any hint of trespass. To the outside world it was picturesque, green slopes, meandering streams, and the occasional deer crossing in the morning mist. But for those who lived within, it was a cage of inherited secrets. The girl's family rarely ventured beyond the hollows, and neighbors, when they appeared, spoke only in polite, shallow tones. They sensed something different about this household, a tension that clung to the air like cobwebs, but curiosity rarely overcame fear. What happened behind the doors of that old, weathered cabin was forbidden in every sense, a convergence of bloodlines that should have remained separate. She grew in isolation, a shadow among her own kin. Friends were strangers, playmates non-existent. Even her own family approached her with a mixture of awe and dread, as if her presence was both a miracle and a curse. Every smile she offered carried an unintentional strangeness. Her laughter sounded like an echo from some other place, a place where innocence and horror intertwined. By the time she was old enough to speak, the villagers whispered about her, softly, behind cupped hands, never daring to approach too closely. Her existence challenged the very idea of normalcy. She was proof that certain lines, once crossed, could never be unwound. Her parents' relationship was never spoken of outside the cabin, yet its imprint was everywhere. Objects in the house seemed to reflect the twisted intimacy of their bond, shared belongings, overlapping patterns of life, and an obsession with keeping the world at bay. To them, the girl was the embodiment of a love that could not survive scrutiny, a love society could not sanction, and yet they nurtured her, protected her, even as the girl herself began to understand in fleeting, instinctive ways that she carried a weight no other child could bear. There was a tension in her gaze, a subtle fear, as if she sensed the eyes of the past upon her, judging, measuring, waiting. By the time she reached her early teens, the physical signs of her heritage became more pronounced. Small irregularities in her features, the way she moved, the peculiar angles of her limbs, details so minor they could be ignored, yet so numerous that they could not be entirely dismissed. And still, life in the hollow pressed forward. Schooling was sporadic, lessons learned at home often interrupted by the silence of the forest, by the wind rattling the windows in the middle of the night. The girl began to feel the isolation not as loneliness, but as inevitability. She was a product of choices made long before she could understand them, and that realization would haunt her every step. Even within the walls of her family home, she learned to navigate suspicion and fear. Each glance from a parent or relative could carry multiple meanings: love, warning, disappointment, or pride. And sometimes, late at night, when the world was still and the mountains swallowed the sounds of the valley, she would hear faint murmurs about her future, whispers of a destiny shaped entirely by her blood. The weight of that knowledge settled in her chest, a quiet, relentless pressure that would shape the person she was becoming. By the time she reached mid-adolescence, the girl's existence had become something of a legend in the valley, though rarely spoken aloud. Her name was known, but not her story, at least not in detail. Outsiders who glimpsed her fleetingly would feel an unshakable unease, as if staring at a living embodiment of some dark, ancestral secret. Her features, already unusual in childhood, were now markedly pronounced. Her eyes, slightly misaligned, seemed to search not for what was in front of her, but for something far beyond. Her jaw and cheekbones bore subtle asymmetries, and her movements, though graceful in parts, sometimes carried an awkward hesitation, a reflection of the twisted line from which she had come. These were the physical manifestations of a legacy most families would do everything to erase. Within the cabin, she became painfully aware of the quiet shame that permeated her family. Her parents loved her, undeniably, but that love was never free of guilt. Every word, every glance, carried the weight of an unspoken history, a history too dangerous to reveal beyond the walls of the home. Occasionally she would catch her mother staring at her with something between longing and despair, or her father's eyes lingering too long in ways that sent shivers down her spine. These moments were fleeting, yet etched themselves permanently into her memory. They were reminders that she was both cherished and feared, that her very existence was a mirror of human transgression, and that she could never fully escape the consequences of a love forbidden by nature itself. The girl's isolation deepened as she became more aware of her difference. School and social interactions were strained at best. Even other children sensed a subtle otherness in her, an unplaceable strangeness that set her apart. She became adept at observing rather than participating, learning to hide, to adapt, to survive in a world that she could not fully enter. Her mind, sharp and instinctive, absorbed knowledge and patterns others overlooked, but it was a keen awareness born of necessity rather than curiosity. Every misstep risked exposing the fragile boundaries that her parents had built around her, boundaries designed to shield a secret that, if revealed, could destroy everything they had preserved. In the stillness of her room, she would sometimes trace the lineage that brought her into being, not in genealogical detail, but as a sense, a feeling of inevitability that coursed through her veins. She was aware, even at an early age, that her life was shaped by forces beyond her control. The valley, the mountains, the very air around her seemed to recognize the weight she carried, and perhaps in some way, to mourn it. Each day, each passing season, reinforced the idea that she was a living testament to a history the world was not meant to confront, a reminder that some choices, once made, ripple outward in ways impossible to contain. And yet, even in this shadowed existence, there were moments of fragile humanity. The girl laughed quietly to herself when she found small joys, an unusual bird landing on the porch, the soft sound of rain on tin roofs, the scent of pine after a summer storm. These moments were fleeting, but they were hers alone. They were proof that even in the darkest chapters of life, small fragments of innocence could endure, if only barely. In her, beauty and horror intertwined, inseparable and undeniable, a living chronicle of a family's most hidden sins. As she grew older, the weight of her existence began to manifest in ways more than physical. Her mind, already shaped by isolation, started to wrestle with questions no one dared to answer. She understood instinctively that her life was not like those around her, that the patterns of her family, the hidden whispers in the house, were part of a design that extended far beyond her own understanding. Every reflection in a cracked mirror reminded her that she carried both legacy and curse, the intertwined lives of her parents encoded in ways visible and invisible. She often caught herself staring at her hands, tracing the subtle differences in her fingers, in the way her bones curved, wondering if she would ever look like anyone else. Her family's attempts to shield her from the world were meticulous. Outsiders were allowed only glimpses, and even then, those glimpses were filtered by distance and shadow. Visitors, when they came, would feel an inexplicable tension in the air, a quiet suffocation that made them leave faster than they intended. And always, in the corners of her consciousness, the girl knew why. She was a living, breathing record of forbidden acts, a presence that exposed the fragility of moral boundaries. The very air seemed charged with the residue of a love that should never have been, a constant reminder that some truths cannot be hidden forever. By the time she was a teenager, she had begun to perceive the reactions of others with uncanny precision. A glance too long from a neighbor, a whisper caught just beyond a doorway, a half-smile of unease. Each of these moments confirmed what she already feared. She was marked, different, and the world outside was both dangerous and curious. Yet within the home, she felt the paradoxical comfort of familiarity. Despite the twisted origins of her family, the walls of the cabin offered a strange kind of sanctuary, a place where the consequences of her existence were muted, if never erased. The psychological weight of her heritage became particularly pronounced in moments of solitude. She would lie awake at night, listening to the creaks and groans of the cabin settling into the mountains, and feel a pull toward understanding something larger, a pattern, a history, a design that linked her to generations she had never met. The knowledge was instinctual, almost genetic. She was part of a cycle that had repeated in secret, a chain of desire and transgression stretching back beyond memory. The truth of her birth was inescapable, woven into every fiber of her being, shaping not only who she was but how she understood the world. And yet, even under this burden, there were glimpses of rebellion, small sparks of life attempting to define themselves independently of ancestry. A laugh that was entirely her own, a fleeting moment of anger that startled even her, a quiet determination to step beyond the boundaries imposed by fear and secrecy. These sparks were fragile, fleeting, but they hinted at the girl's potential to survive, perhaps even to endure, despite the weight of generations pressing down upon her. In this tension between inheritance and individuality, the story of the most inbred girl of the valley continued, each day etching new lines into a narrative the world was never meant to see. By the time she reached late adolescence, the consequences of her family's secrets became impossible to ignore. Her body, mind, and very existence carried the weight of generations of inbreeding, a legacy that had silently accumulated in the hidden corners of her lineage. Subtle genetic anomalies were now more apparent. Slight deformities, unusual reflexes, and a mind that processed the world in ways both brilliant and unsettling. She had a capacity to notice patterns, to detect lies, and to sense the intentions of those around her. but it was accompanied by a fragility, a constant physical and emotional strain that reminded her daily of the price exacted by her parents' forbidden union. The outside world remained largely inaccessible, but curiosity and necessity pushed her toward it. She would occasionally step beyond the valley where the mountains gave way to roads, towns, and faces she did not recognize. And with each encounter, the reaction of others became painfully clear. They saw her as different, even if they could not articulate why. Whispers followed her through aisles of stores, and subtle recoils in conversation reminded her that the very blood she carried provoked instinctive unease. The girl had begun to understand the depth of isolation that was her inheritance, not only from her family but from society itself. The inescapable truth of her origin cast a shadow over every interaction, every relationship, every attempt at belonging. Within her own home, the tension grew heavier. Her parents, aware of the outside world's judgment, became increasingly protective, almost obsessive in guarding the fragile secret of her existence. Their love, tinged with guilt and fear, was suffocating in its intensity. They warned her, repeatedly and subtly, that any misstep could bring ruin, not only to themselves but to the fragile equilibrium of their hidden lives. In these moments, the girl felt the full force of her inheritance. She was both shielded and trapped, nurtured and burdened, loved and condemned. The duality of her existence became a lens through which she viewed the world, a place of beauty, danger, and forbidden truth, all inextricably intertwined. By now, she had begun to understand the societal mechanics at play, the invisible lines that separated her family from everyone else. Her instincts became finely tuned, her understanding of human behavior uncanny. She noticed when a stranger's gaze lingered too long, when a neighbor's smile carried suspicion, or when someone's curiosity threatened to expose her family's secret. And yet, even in this web of vigilance, she found moments of defiance. Small rebellions, a brief conversation with a sympathetic classmate, a daring excursion into the town, a private journal she hid from prying eyes, allowed her to assert some semblance of control over her life, a fragile claim to individuality against the weight of generations. Her story was no longer simply one of hidden ancestry or isolated tragedy. It was the story of a life shaped entirely by secrecy, a living testament to the consequences of choices that dared not see the light of day. And in those rare, quiet moments, she could feel the duality of her existence, the pull of blood that bound her, and the faint whisper of a world she might one day enter, if only she could survive the shadows of her own making. As she approached adulthood, the consequences of her lineage became impossible to ignore. Her body carried the scars of generations of inbreeding, subtle but unyielding. An asymmetry here, a weakness there, a mind both sharper and more fragile than most. She began to feel the weight of expectation and inevitability pressing upon her. The valley, once a haven, now felt like a cage, every tree and stone a reminder that her existence was unnatural in the eyes of the world, yet inevitable in the hands of her bloodline. Her parents' vigilance had intensified over the years. Every action, every interaction outside the family was scrutinized. Visitors were kept at a distance, questions deflected, and the girl herself became an unwitting enforcer of the secrecy that protected her. In her own heart, she felt a strange blend of love and resentment toward those who had created her under such circumstances. She loved them, undeniably, but she also feared what they had made her. The knowledge of her origins pressed upon her, shaping her perceptions, her desires, and her sense of self. She was both product and prisoner of a history no one outside her home could fully understand. When she ventured beyond the mountains, the reactions of others confirmed the lessons she had learned in childhood. People looked at her and sensed difference, even if they could not articulate why. Some recoiled, some whispered, and others stared too long, drawn to a strangeness they could not name. It became clear that no matter how far she traveled, the shadow of her family's sins followed. The girl realized that her identity was inseparable from her ancestry, that the forbidden love of her parents was written into every cell, every movement, every glance. She could not escape it, nor could she deny it. Within the home, life remained a delicate balance between nurture and control. Her parents' love were as relentless but suffocating, their pride tempered by guilt. Every day she walked a line between obedience and self-expression, between the desire to live freely and the knowledge that any misstep could expose a secret the family had fought to hide for decades. She understood with an almost instinctive clarity that her life was not hers alone. She was a living embodiment of a family's darkest choices, a reminder that some acts once committed echo indefinitely. And yet, amid the suffocating weight of her existence, there were glimpses of resilience. Moments of laughter, fleeting defiance, quiet acts of curiosity and exploration reminded her that even the most burdened life contains the capacity for small joys, for fragile assertions of individuality. These sparks were fleeting, but they offered a glimpse of what might be possible, a life not entirely dictated by blood, secrecy and shame, but one in which she could, perhaps, claim some portion of freedom for herself. Her story, dark and unsettling as it was, became a testament to survival, the endurance of a human spirit burdened by the sins of its ancestors, yet still capable of finding light, however dim, in the shadows of a haunted world. It was during these years that the girl began to understand the true scope of her isolation, not merely physical but psychological. Every thought, every emotion seemed to be shadowed by the history that had produced her. She noticed patterns in her family's behavior, the subtle ways they moved through the world, their obsession with secrecy, the rituals of avoidance and distraction. Every glance in the mirror reminded her that she was both observer and observed, a living record of forbidden acts that could not be erased. There was no escaping the legacy of her birth. It clung to her like a second skin, invisible yet suffocating. The tension within the household was a constant companion. Her parents' love was palpable, but it carried the weight of guilt and fear that she could never fully comprehend. They spoke little of the past, yet every gesture, every word was heavy with meaning. She learned to interpret glances and pauses as warnings, instructions, or confessions. In this environment, the girl developed an acute awareness of human fragility, a psychological acuity born of necessity. She understood that the world outside her home would never accept her for what she was, and even within her family, acceptance came wrapped in the complicated layers of shame and protection. Her physical and mental differences made her a target of suspicion, even among those who knew nothing of her origin. People sensed her as other, as different, and the girl became attuned to the silent reactions of those around her, the avoidance, the discomfort, the instinctive recoil. It was a constant reminder that the consequences of forbidden acts are not confined to the moment, but ripple across generations, shaping lives in ways both subtle and profound. She learned to move carefully through the world, balancing curiosity and caution, survival and desire, knowing that every step carried potential peril. By now, the valley itself had become both sanctuary and prison. The mountains offered concealment, shielding the family from prying eyes, yet they also reinforced the girl's isolation. She knew the history of the place, the lineages that had intertwined in ways too shameful to record, the stories whispered among the older generations that never reached public knowledge. And in understanding this, she recognized that she was the culmination of centuries of secrecy, a living chronicle of choices too dangerous to confront. Her existence was proof that some truths, no matter how deeply buried, insist on surfacing. Amid this oppressive weight, the girl still found fleeting moments of fragile humanity. She laughed quietly when alone. She listened to the songs of the forest. She watched the wind ripple across the streams. These moments were brief, almost stolen, but they reminded her that even in a life burdened by secrecy and taboo, fragments of innocence and beauty could survive. They were proof that a human spirit, no matter how encumbered, can endure, even when its origin is tainted by acts society refuses to name. If you're still watching, you're already braver than most. Tell us in the comments, What would you have done if this was your bloodline? The years passed, and the girl, now a young woman, came to understand the full magnitude of her existence. She was no longer merely a child born of a forbidden union. She was a living archive of human transgression, a mirror reflecting the choices her parents had made, and the unbroken chain of secrecy that had shaped the valley itself. Every glance in a mirror, every shadow on the cabin wall, reminded her that she carried the consequences of acts society deemed unspeakable. She was proof that some taboos, once broken, ripple outward across generations, leaving marks impossible to erase. The physical manifestations of her inbred lineage were now unmistakable to any careful observer, yet they were only part of the story. Her mind, attuned to nuance and subtle cues, became both her shield and her prison. She could sense fear, suspicion, and fascination in others before a word was spoken. The weight of observation, both self-imposed and from those around her, taught her caution, patience, and a strange, intuitive intelligence. She knew instinctively how to navigate a world that would never fully accept her, how to hide the vulnerabilities that society might exploit, and how to maintain the delicate veil of secrecy her family had spent generations constructing. Her parents, long aware that the world could not comprehend or forgive their choices, grew more protective as she matured. Their warnings were quiet but firm. To step too far outside the bounds of the hollow was to risk exposure, scandal, and irreparable shame. Yet even under such vigilance, she began to test the boundaries of what was possible. Small acts of defiance, walking farther into town than instructed, speaking with neighbors cautiously, or daring to express her thoughts openly, became exercises in claiming agency over a life shaped by inevitability. Each step reminded her that while blood defined her origins, it did not entirely dictate the life she could carve for herself. Still, the valley and her family's shadow remained inescapable. The mountains whispered the secrets of the past. The cabin walls carried the echoes of choices too shameful to be named, and the very air seemed heavy with the presence of generations who had gone before. She was simultaneously a part of that history, and apart from it, a paradox embodied in flesh and bone. And in those moments of quiet reflection, she felt the profound isolation of knowing that her existence, both remarkable and horrifying, was unique in a way no outsider could fully comprehend. Yet even amid the darkness, the young woman discovered fragile sparks of life that were hers alone. A quiet laugh, a fleeting sense of freedom when walking through the misty woods, the soft brush of wind against her face. These small moments were evidence that, despite the inescapable weight of her bloodline, some fragments of normalcy and humanity could persist. She carried within her the duality of creation and transgression, innocence and consequence, survival and inevitability. And it is within this tension, this impossible balance, that her story endures, a haunting testament to the enduring, sometimes terrifying power of the human bloodline. Now, as she steps fully into adulthood, the girl, now a woman, faces the full reckoning of her existence. She is both witness and product of a lineage steeped in secrecy, born from choices most dare not speak of. Every interaction with the outside world carries risk. Every smile, every glance, every casual conversation is a test. Will someone notice the subtle differences, the inherited oddities, the traces of a family history too dark to reveal? She has become acutely aware that her life is not simply her own. It is the continuation of a story written in silence, in hidden rooms, in the shadows of the mountains where her ancestors once walked. Within the home, the dynamic of love and fear continues to shape her. Her parents' devotion is unwavering, yet it is entwined with guilt and apprehension. They remind her, subtly and sometimes painfully, that their choices dictate more than just their lives. They define hers as well. She understands this fully now. Each decision she makes, each step she takes toward independence, is measured against a lifetime of inherited secrecy. Even the smallest action could unravel the fragile web that has preserved their family from judgment and intrusion. In this sense, she is not free, but she is aware, and awareness is its own kind of power. Her body, her mind, and her presence tell a story that cannot be erased. The physical and mental traces of inbreeding are intertwined with a subtle brilliance, a strange intelligence born of isolation, introspection, and survival. She sees patterns others miss, reads intentions before they are spoken, and understands the unspoken rules of human behavior in ways few could comprehend. Yet this acuity comes at a cost, the constant pressure of being different, of existing as an anomaly, and of carrying the accumulated weight of generations of transgression. The world beyond the mountains may never accept her, but within, she has learned to navigate, to survive, and to endure. And yet, despite the darkness, she finds moments that belong to her alone. A laugh shared with no one, the wind brushing against her face on a solitary walk, the quiet observation of life in the valley. These fleeting joys are her proof that, even within a life shaped by forbidden acts, small fragments of freedom and individuality persist. They are fragile, ephemeral, yet unmistakably hers. They hint at the possibility that even in the most harrowing circumstances, survival is possible, and within survival, the quiet assertion of humanity remains. Her story is a testament not merely to inbreeding or secrecy, but to the resilience of the human spirit. It is a record of a life shaped by transgression and isolation, yet still capable of finding small sparks of beauty, moments of understanding, and glimpses of freedom. She is the culmination of generations, the living evidence of choices hidden from the world, and the reminder that some truths, no matter how carefully concealed, endure. And in their endurance they teach, haunt, and illuminate the fragility and strength of human existence. And now, we arrive at the final chapter of her story, a reflection not only on her life, but on the consequences carried silently through generations. The woman stands at the intersection of past and present, a living repository of secrets too horrifying for daylight, yet too persistent to ignore. Her existence challenges the very idea of morality, family, and nature itself. She is the product of acts most would recoil from, and yet she walks through the world as a testament to survival, adaptation, and the unrelenting force of blood. The valley that shaped her has changed little over the decades. Mountains rise as they always have, streams wind through the hollows, and the wind whispers secrets no one outside the mountains will ever hear. Yet within those timeless walls, the story of her life, her birth, her isolation, her struggle, remains indelibly etched. It is a story carried not in books or public records, but in the eyes of the woman herself, in the faint tremor of her hands when the past presses too close, and in the quiet intelligence that allows her to navigate a world that might never accept her. Her parents, long aware that the world cannot forgive or understand, age with the same mixture of pride, shame, and fear that defined her upbringing. They have loved her fiercely, protected her relentlessly, and in so doing have created a life both sacred and suffocating. And now, as she moves beyond the protective confines of the home, she carries not only her own destiny, but the weight of generations, choices, sins, and secrets that no one else could bear. Her existence is proof that some truths, no matter how dark, persist, that some consequences are inevitable, and that the human heart can endure even when burdened by acts society refuses to name. Yet despite the shadow that hangs over her, there is resilience. She has learned to find small sparks of life in the quietest moments, a solitary walk through misty forests, the sound of water over rocks, the rare and fleeting laugh shared with those few who accept her. These moments are fragile but undeniable, a reminder that even the most burdened life contains the capacity for beauty, agency, and humanity. They are proof that survival is not merely the act of existing, but the act of finding meaning, even in a world shaped by the sins of the past. And so her story ends, but it also endures, a dark, haunting chronicle of human choices, of love twisted into secrecy, and of life born under impossible circumstances. She is the most inbred girl of the valley, yes, but she is also more than that, a living testament to endurance, a witness to the fragile balance between sin and survival, and a reminder that history, no matter how carefully hidden, always leaves traces. In her, the past refuses to die, and in her survival, the story of humanity's darkest corners is preserved for those daring enough to face it.